If you're shopping for a new keyboard for your Mac, you might notice that there is an endless sea of choices available from Apple's own Magic Keyboard to various third-party options, and making the right choice can seem like a daunting task. All of them have different specs, styles, and options, and it's easy to spend hours scrolling and comparing them, trying to find the perfect fit for your setup. I've been there myself, and with all the new keyboards and options showing up recently, I wanted to explore some of the best choices available and condense that into something that is digestible for everyone, whether you're editing videos, gaming, or just need a reliable option for day-to-day use. Today, I'm gonna dig into a half dozen keyboards or so, going over the advantages and disadvantages of each. That hopefully provides some value for anyone out there who is curious about what options they have and what to look out for. So if that sounds like you, maybe you're not sure of which model to pick up, or you just want to know what my experience has been like with all of these, stick around and let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. The amount of Mac peripherals has exploded over the last few years, and while I think it's great to have a ton of choices, that can often make things a lot harder to navigate when trying to find the right product. You can literally spend hours going through everything out there, and on top of that, the amount of things Macs can do is also expanding, from creative workflows to gaming, which can heavily influence decisions that you might make choosing a keyboard. And my goal here today is to focus on the products that I've either found to be the most useful, or the most popular, or have the best support to help streamline that whole process. Also, full disclosure before we start, I haven't been paid by any of these companies to mention their gear, but I did specifically request samples from both Corsair and Keychron to review, but everything else here has been purchased myself, and I'm under no obligation from anyone to say anything about this stuff, and this is just my honest opinion. But we do have a lot to get into here, so let's just get right into it. We might as well start off with the easiest choice for a lot of folks, which is going to be the actual Apple Magic Keyboard. If you buy an iMac, one of these is already going to be in the box, but Apple is likely going to push one of these if you buy a desktop Mac from them, and there are a number of advantages to using them. First off, just the convenience factor of picking this stuff up while you're buying a Mac or in the Apple Store is much easier than trying to search around for another solution. And the benefit you have with this gear is you know that it's just gonna work, and normally it has very few issues. With a Magic Keyboard, there's no added step of having to pair anything through Bluetooth or a USB receiver. Apple has always had fantastic support as far as warranty goes, and the build quality I would say is slightly above average, with it having an aluminum chassis and a plastic base, but there are some things right off the hop that you need to be aware of. You'll see both at the Apple Store and at third-party retailers that there are a number of models of the Magic Keyboard. The newest versions with Touch ID have a USB-C charging port, where the models before those will have a Lightning port. And then there's the versions without Touch ID. One of these has USB-C, but the one with a numpad doesn't. And the important thing to note with that one is you're likely going to get a Lightning to USB-A charging cable, which is pretty much useless on all the new Macs. So you will either have to buy an adapter or another cable to effectively charge that particular model. Outside that, these all feel relatively the same typing-wise, as they're essentially the same design with chiclet-style keys that a lot of people like for office use, and all the boards have about the same amount of key travel at 1.3 millimeters. The main difference between all of these is gonna be that Touch ID button, which is definitely useful for both logging into your Mac and approving settings or changes instead of entering a password. But if you don't care about that, there really isn't much you're gaining there. Any of these is going to work fine for most folks without any issues, but they are quite expensive, coming in between $99 and $179 depending on the layout. And when you look at the actual specs, there is a lot to be desired there. The latency on these keyboards is pretty bad compared to everything else that I'm going to look at today. It's not something that you're likely going to notice in regular day-to-day use, but it is still worth mentioning, and you don't have any kind of multi-device pairing options. There's no keyboard customization, incline adjustment, or backlight, which you normally see on most products in this price range. If you do want some of those features and you're willing to look outside of Apple, that's where you can find a bit better value for the price, as long as you're willing to give up some of the seamless connectivity of the Apple products and features like Touch ID. Probably the closest reliable option I would say to the Magic Keyboard, at least design-wise, is going to be the Logitech MX Keys S, which is another chiclet style keyboard. That will run you between 80 and 120 bucks depending on the size and if it's on sale, and you end up getting a lot more for the price. It's gonna have the same scissor style key switches that do have a bit more key travel at 2.1 millimeters, which I should note feel a bit softer or more squishy and not as firm as the Magic Keyboard. This is also a plastic keyboard versus the aluminum shell that you get on the Magic Keyboard, but it is still quite sturdy, and with the MX Keys S, you also get a backlight. You can use it wirelessly with a provided receiver, or you can pair it up to 3 devices via Bluetooth, both of which have a much better latency than the Magic Keyboard. You can also customize the controls with Logitech software if you want, which I have had to do on the mini version in the past, as the only thing that I don't like about the smaller layout is it is missing some of the media controls, so you might want to make some adjustments there, but otherwise I used my old MX Keys keyboard for years without any issues. That being said, if you do have issues, I've also found Logitech support to be very good, where on other keyboards that I've had trouble with in the past, like the MX Mechanical, they've sent out replacements with very little friction. Speaking of which, if you're looking to keep the low profile nature of a chiclet keyboard, but you want more robust or better mechanical switches, that is one model I would probably stay away from. I used the Logitech MX Mechanical a couple of years back and it failed on me shortly after buying it. And while Logitech was quick to replace it, I've since heard from multiple people who have had the exact same issue where a bunch of keys just stop working. That keyboard is also somewhat expensive, running between 150 and 170 bucks, and if you want a cheaper alternative that's frankly just as good, if not better, the Keychron K3 Max is a great option. For some of you, this might look familiar, as Apple used the K3 Max in some of their marketing material for the new Mac Mini, but this comes in between $94 and $114 depending on what options you want in terms of switches and backlight. The model that I have here is the full RGB backlight with red Gatoron swappable switches that are very satisfying to type on, with a nice tactile feel and are relatively quiet as well. Also, when I say these are swappable, it just means I can easily remove or change the switch, where models without this, the switches will be soldered in, so this just makes it possible to replace or change switches with very little headache. The key travel here is about 2.9 millimeters total, so right in the middle of the chiclet style keyboards that I've gone over, and the more traditional mechanical keyboards I'll touch on in a minute, but overall the build quality here is fantastic. Similar to the Magic Keyboard, this has an aluminum chassis with a PBT plastic bottom, but unlike the Magic Keyboard or the MX Keys, there are 2 sets of feet on the K3 Max that I can use to adjust the incline to whatever I find most comfortable. Also, on the back of the case, not only can I switch between wireless receiver and Bluetooth connection types where I can pair up to 3 devices, but I can use this wired if I want a lower latency, which, by the way, the K3 Max has the lowest latency out of any of the keyboards I'm talking about today, so for anyone who is considering using something for a combination of office use and gaming, this might be your best option. Beside the connection switch in the back, there's also a toggle for going between Mac and PC layouts, and Keychron does provide you with some extra keycaps should you choose to use either platform, which is nice. And this is somewhat customizable as well, as Keychron does have their own software, although it is kind of strange. This is actually a web app that you'll access through your browser, which you can go to update your firmware or make adjustments to your backlight or key mappings. And I have to admit, I kinda like the idea of doing things this way versus installing an app on your machine. This way you know there are no background processes running on your Mac, and there's no added bloat, which is always nice. Beyond that, the K3 Max is definitely one of the best low-profile mechanical keyboards that I've tried, but If you want a more traditional style mechanical keyboard, Keychron has similar styles with the K2, which I've used in the past quite a bit and has a similar feature set. Or if you really want to step things up, you can look at the Q3 Max. This has very similar specs to the K3 Max in terms of key travel and latency, with it having slightly more of each. But the Q3 Max is built out of solid aluminum and has a polycarbonate plate with a double gasket mount to reduce any vibrations. And let me just say, this keyboard is heavy, like you could definitely do some damage with this thing. But it's likely the most well-built, solid keyboard out of anything here, and while it does have most of the same feature set as the K3 Max, it does have some notable additions. First of all, the switches on this are Jupiter Red Gatorons that have a really satisfying sound and feel. Those have a travel of 3.2 millimeters, and if you look under the keycaps, you'll notice they look somewhat similar to the K3 Max, where these are also swappable, so you can easily change and customize these switches as well. You'll also notice that you've got a customizable knob on here, which by default will control the volume level on your machine, but you can customize this in that same Keychron web app to do anything you want. I've been using that to scroll my timeline in Final Cut Pro, which I find quite handy, and again, if you're using this for either office or creative work combined with gaming, there's a ton of value here. That being said, there are a couple of downsides with the Q3 Max. For one, I'm not a huge fan of the provided keycaps. I like the color, but I find that the edges, specifically on the spacebar, are a little sharp, and it would probably be better if I could adjust the incline. But unlike the K3 Max, there's no feet on the underside. And one other very minor thing I don't really like is the typeface used on the keycaps. This feels a little bit too campy in my opinion, especially with a price that's often north of $200. I think if they were to touch that up a bit, it would really elevate that to match the premium nature of the keyboard, but the next model that I'm going to talk about feels a little more polished in that regard. That is the Corsair K65 Plus, and to my knowledge, this is the only third-party keyboard here that you can buy directly from the Apple Store, at least in the USA. Just like the Q3 Max, you've got a knob in the upper right, but unlike the Q3 Max, you're not able to set this to anything that you want, but you can switch its functionality by holding the function key and the up and down arrows, which I do find a lot more usable for what I'd use this for, but it's also got a host of differences compared to all the other options here. The case is made of polycarbonate with a steel top plate and is very well built with kind of a neat texture on the bottom, where there are a set of feet like the K3 Max for adjusting the incline. Along the edges of the case, there's the same switches as the Keychron keyboards in terms of switching between platform layouts and connection types, which, again, you can pair up to 3 devices when it comes to Bluetooth, and there's also a built-in receiver holder and a button on the left-hand side for turning the backlight off or on. Now, the version that I have here is white, but you can also get this in Glacier Blue, which has more of a translucent look to it, but I really like the white, and I find the design from that texture on the bottom to the typeface used on the keys is a lot better than the Keychron models. Underneath the keys are Corsair red linear switches that feel and sound fairly similar to the red Gatorons. Those have a total travel of 3.8 millimeters, and they do actuate faster than the Q3 Max keys, but have a much more classic feel to them, I would say. Those are also hot swappable like the K3 and Q3 Max, where I can just pop the switches out if I ever want to change them. The K65 Plus also has very similar latency to the Keychron keyboards, which is quite low and makes it great for gaming, which should be obvious given the brand, but this is probably my favorite keyboard out of the bunch with all the features and the level of polish. My only couple of complaints with it is 1, the cable provided isn't as nice as the braided cable that Keychron provides, and 2, the software to customize it is pretty hefty for what it does, with around a 1.45 gigabyte file size. Within there, you've got the same basic options like setting up lighting effects, key assignments, and you can also toggle off or on the control dial functionality. And that stuff all works really well, but this just seems like something that should take up a lot less space, but that's a relatively small complaint. The The K65 Plus is also one of the more expensive options here, coming in at $179, but I do like the fact that you can buy it directly through the Apple Store. Apple generally doesn't sell subpar third-party products on their site, and unlike all the other options here, this comes with a 2-year warranty versus the 1-year warranty you'll get with everything else. That being said, I think any of these keyboards are great, and it really boils down to what you're looking for in a keyboard and what your preferences are. For everything but the Corsair keyboard here, you do have a variety of choices when it comes to size and layout, and I know most people are going to be opinionated between brands and what style of keyboard they want, and there are a ton of great products out there that I just don't have time to dig into. So if you know of anything outside of these that you'd like to give a shout out to, please drop those in the comments down below and let me know what those are, but that's all I have for you today. If you found this video useful or enjoyable, feel free to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more tech-related content or help me design a keyboard where each key press randomly shuffles around the key layout, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.